Good day, everyone. Let's have a conversation about philanthropy. My name is Joshua Humbert, and let's get into it. The last time I was here at CBC, we had a wonderful conversation around how philanthropy impacts the community. And one of the things that we unearthed last year was, how do we bring real concepts, real language, real talent, and creativity to how we're transforming the sort of the view of philanthropy, and or are some of these terms outdated? So over the course of, I want to say, the last 3 to 4 months, talking to friends, family, and community members, they came up with some questions. So me being a bit of a philanthropic expert, I said, you know what, let's tackle this. Philanthropic finance is what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to run through a couple of questions that I've received that really put a spin and or unpack what we should be thinking about this new age philanthropy and the way that we should be looking at it in context. So I'm going to attempt to do this all by myself with no interviewing, but I think it's important for us to all have a conversation around what philanthropic finance is. So I'm going to read the first question. You say philanthropic finance. Can you unpack what that means for someone who has always thought of philanthropy as charity? Absolutely. Philanthropic finance is the ability to understand when generosity meets your investing. We often look at the social impact and philanthropic heartstrings of what that means to be a philanthropic individual. But now I think we're in a time now where our challenges are now in a space where we have to update the terminology and or the level of impact it has on the way that we look at creating these solutions. So when I say philanthropic finance, it's the way money is deployed, economic return, the way it's allocated, the social return, the same principles that basically meet the both bottom lines of social impact and the financial bottom line. The other question that I received was, how do you see philanthropic capital as a different from contemporary to traditional financial capital? Well, that thought process is traditional financial capital seeks monetary profit. Philanthropic capital seeks human, social, or environmental profit, but they're complementary to the impact of investing, like ESG. Blended finance show that you can create both with some types of return. That's a simple way of saying, if you're looking at a philanthropic issue and you're trying to get to the solution, a lot of times the industry and the nonprofit world has created a one singular language that you're supposed to speak with partners, stakeholders, and donors. I would like to submit that it's time to update that language so that we can start thinking of it as a philanthropic impact, but more of a investment. So when we say a donor for justice, why can't it be a investor in justice, right? What is the bottom line? What are the metrics? What are this person looking, or these individuals or organizations or foundations looking to get out of it? The goal is now trying to think through the best way to start reframing the way we look at how philanthropy is set in a box versus the way we should be looking at it as a financial tool to changing social life, like improving the human condition. So one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit as we unpack this is the ability to actually make it simple, right? Philanthropy is pulling on the philanthropic heartstrings that allows us to think through the best way that we want to live our lives and be of service to others. I'm also thinking that the best way for you to be of service to others is to not to forget the mental part of what is the ROI on your investment in the philanthropic community. How do you make sure that when you're providing your hard-earned dollars, your discretionary dollars, that they can go to your family, your friends, your community, and you're giving it to causes that you're putting it in someone else's hand? What type of questions should you be asking? What type of financial documents should you be looking at? The same way a banker looks at your viability to buy a home, take out a loan for business, right? I think we need to get into a space where we're looking at the investment part of more venture philanthropy versus just the way the philanthropic heartstrings are pulling you. So those are some of the things that we were thinking. I remember sitting on as a board member, and we got a very detailed report around the finances and some of the pain points of what the organization was experiencing. And then we got the fundraising report. And then I recognized within the fundraising report that the finance report and the fundraising report looked completely different from each other. It wasn't in alignment. They were disconjointed. And I had to think to myself, how do you solve financial issues, but you're seeking fundraising solutions to get you to that point? So we had to sit back and have a conversation as a board. These are the philanthropic ideas that I want us to embrace because that's why we're all here. But more importantly, I want us to embrace those financial terms that allow us to solve a financial problem, which is philanthropic, but salaries have to be paid, overhead, creating the ability for either the scholarships or the ability to understand what we're doing in the community and how that costs money. So when we think about this, I want to think through it where we have an honest conversation, and especially in the nonprofit community, where we think through, have we started to outgrow some of the philanthropic terms and not keeping up with the way that we should be thinking about how to solve modern day problems. So we also have philanthropic finance. I know we have that. We have venture capital, philanthropic venture capital. We have those things. But more importantly, we know those types of things, social impact, right, reports and things of that nature. But as a society, are we really thinking through the best way to serve the next generation of humanity's problems by looking at it from the same box of philanthropy? Are we too comfortable in creating the alignment where it's charity versus the best impact and or investment to save, our community, or even grow and impact our community, or save people from the margins of society, right? Those are the types of things that I believe having these upfront conversations about debunking the way that we look at philanthropy and putting it more in a box of philanthropic finance, that we would be better off with providing solutions towards some of our most challenging problems. I'll give you another question that we came into, which was really good. Do you see philanthropy as competing or filling the gaps left by government and markets? Philanthropy has always stood in the gap between the public sector and the private sector. In America, we have a philanthropic industry that is unlike anywhere else in the world, right? We are like a three-legged stool, and it really does work because it's interwoven into our public society and our private society, and it basically fills the gap when one of those two start to waver. And having individuals like donors, stakeholders, nonprofits, associations, fundraisers, philanthropic finance agents step into the gap, it allows us to push in a way that doesn't forget who we're serving along the way. So I think there's over 1.6 million nonprofits out there doing God's work. But more importantly, we understand that resources are scarce. So how do you have a conversation with nonprofits and or fundraisers who need to develop into development professionals, right? And then now need to develop into philanthropic finance officers. Like, how do we have a conversation of what does that trajectory look like over time? I'm giving you a lot right now because I want you to think through the best way to start thinking about how you see philanthropy. Is it a religious view? Are you looking at it from a business sense? And then also knowing that the way that you look at philanthropy, someone's always modeling their behavior after how you are modeling yours, right? And we never know who's watching. So I would push to the folks that are in this industry to think through, have we outgrown some of these outdated terms around philanthropy or the outlook of it in a sense, to how should we be looking at it from a business case study that leads the direction more than us trying to convince people that philanthropy is a philanthropic heartstring type of concept, right? That you can't get real investments without looking at the world in such a bleak way versus a forward-looking way. I believe we would position ourselves better moving into the next generation of challenges when looking at it from a more of a business mindset, knowing that scarcity of funds seem to be becoming ever more increasing. I took over as the institutional vice president of institutional advancement at Coppin State University, and we launched a campaign. It was the first of its kind, and I recognized that in order for me to raise 3 million in 25 million dollars in 3 years, we were going to have to do something different. I was going to have to start looking at a business case, and we call that fiduciary study, right? But like, how many donors do we believe we have in the pipeline to actually achieve this goal in said period of time? That's the traditional way of looking at how to launch a campaign, right? Board support, community support, alumni support, friends and family, everything you can think of. But I did something a little different. I looked at, if I had to have 5 different sectors and create a business case for each of those 5 different business sectors, and then try to figure out partners that were going to help us solve these challenges for each of these campaign anchors, I was going to be in a better space than me trying to figure out how I was just going to pull on the philanthropic heartstrings to get me there. I had to figure out how to create a philanthropic finance agent out of myself, to think through that everything I did had to be so business oriented, outside of my natural slipstream of just being a fundraiser or a development professional. I had to go so much deeper into understanding that business is a language and an animal all itself. And then to understand how corporations, foundations, and individuals looking to invest, not just donate, I had to really think through, how do I best create the best case for support, which we call it a philanthropy. But more importantly, how did I just move away from the case of support to the business plan around how I was going to pull them along, and or what we needed to do to show that this was a credible investment. And then also create not just MOUs, but smart contracts around, if you give us this money, we will do this, and put us ourselves as an accountability partner as well. If we do not do said things, we do not get the money. Not just, we will do our best and we will try to move the ball down, and hopefully they'll give us an extension on reporting metrics that we said we were going to do, but being very intentional, just like we would have a person come sit down in front of us and say, hey, I want to invest, but tell me how you're going to give me my money back, right? But in this case, is tell me how you're going to create this value that allows us to be successful, or for us to feel like we weren't throwing money away. So that shifted my whole sort of idea of making the statements that I used to make in philanthropy, like, I don't make a withdrawal before I make a deposit, right? I have to be a mile wide and a mile deep. I switched that thinking into, how do I prepare, position, perform, and preserve, right? How do I project manage this entire relationship from beginning to end of this journey, and then treat it like it's an investment that could be taken away at any given time, not just at a reporting metrics, but if they did not see the things that we were supposed to do, like keeping up with meetings, getting people to the meetings, pulling our fair share in that way. I really made a different business case for the way that these institutions, foundations, individuals, corporations alike, to say to them, this is going to look a little bit differently than the money that and or the investments or the donations you've given in the past. I want you to hold us fully accountable as if we are a 125-year-old startup. So we started to think through, how do we create this energy around being a 125-year-old startup? What type of things did we have to do to now position ourselves in a way that allowed us to say, we are a startup, even though we have 125 years under our belt of serving our community, serving scholars, transforming scholars, nurturing potential lives, right? But the president, Dr. Jenkins, gave us a great mandate. Go forth and conquer. Show me that we can transform this institution by increasing our endowment by 65%. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have a different energy about the way that I looked at traditional philanthropy and them investing in who we are as if we were a 125-year-old startup. So I know I threw a lot at you guys, but I wanted to just have a conversation where we can start thinking and pontificating together and resourcing together about, is it time to start thinking through how philanthropy is created to now we've gotten far enough where we are now need to create different levels of speak. We need to create different levels of energy around the way we show up and want to solve problems. How do we create more of the business case versus the case of support, right? And I know it sounds very similar, but they are very much different when you start getting into the tentacles and the flesh and bones of what it is, right? Different metrics start coming up when you start thinking about how a startup is perceived by an investor than a nonprofit. And then from there, we started to understand once one company came on board and they saw the way that we were doing business and we transformed the way we did business, other nonprofits started taking heed and investing and trying to understand how we're doing it in such a period of time. Corporations started saying, we love what you're doing. We love the new way that your organization has shown up. We know the way that it would look in the past, but we are invigorated by what this leadership looks like right now. It's all because we created a business case for who we are and how we wanted to be perceived than just the philanthropic case for support. So hopefully that was a lot. I'm looking forward to answering more questions, but this was a good follow-up for me to be able to expand upon last year around how philanthropic finance is really the new direction, in my opinion, for the way that we look at philanthropy. Hope this has been helpful. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, your ideas, and let's keep this conversation going. Be well. Cool beans.